Alright, hope you're all good. It's been a little while since I've uploaded anything to YouTube, so I thought I would get stuck into my latest release, which was a remix, which I've had out at the end of October on Hospital. If you've not seen that, it features on the London Electricity Rebuilding Better Worlds album, which looks a bit like this. My track somewhere there, if you can see, which is a remix of London Electricity Possible Worlds featuring Inja. Just a bit of a backstory on how it came about. Not long had my Gold Frat release at the end of May, which was a 2-tracker, Journey Through and Understated. And I was checking emails late one night and just saw an email from Tony Coleman, London Electricity, basically saying, do you want to get involved in a remix project that I've got going? It was really tight turnaround. I think he said it was about 10 days. And was I up for it? Obviously, I said yes. So one thing or another, finally got the stems, which I think left me with probably about 5 or 6 days to get it turned around. And so I just sort of got stuck in. I think it was a bank holiday weekend, got the main bulk of it down in a couple of days. And I think like the rest of it was just over a couple more days, sort of tweaking and back and forth and feedback with Tony and stuff to get it over the line. It's worth saying like he was really helpful in that process as well, sort of giving useful feedback. And yeah, just massively grateful to be included and get the opportunity to release on Hospital, which is a label that I've been following for probably the best part of 20 years. So anyway, let's get into it. So I thought I'd start off by opening up a project and just loading up all the stems. So this is basically what I got sent, all of these tracks. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of tracks there. So the first thing I really needed to do was figure out what I was going to use and what I wasn't going to use. Obviously, we've got kicks, snares, got all the drums, guitar parts, strings. There's a synth solo in there. Then they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 tracks of the Inja vocal, and another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another couple of tracks, like 2 or 3 tracks of Vonnie vocals and sort of backing vocals and stuff like that, and some effects. So 25 tracks in total. I needed to figure out what I was going to do. So, there's lots of ways that I could have approached it. One thought in my mind was, I could write something totally from scratch, come up with a completely original idea, but with the time frame that I had, there was a lot, based on the time I had, that influenced a few of the decisions that I made. So what I wanted to do was kind of pick one piece that sort of stuck out to me and sort of go from that. And I remember when Tony sent me the stems at the time, he basically said it's quite an epic track, which it is, and there's a lot going on. And to just pick one bit and kind of try and work my magic on that. So I knew I was going to use some of the Inja vocals. And I knew I probably wasn't going to use any of the drums. I was probably going to build all those from scratch. So I went flicking through, and one of the parts was this Rhodes. Which is just really, really nice. And that was the thing that stuck out to me straight away. Obviously, loads of other parts that I could have used, and I made use of a few different bits, but that was the main part that I took, other than vocals, and also used a little bit of this guitar, but affected it quite a lot, and I think I might have used the strings as well, and I also used a little bit of this synth solo. But other than that, pretty much everything else was original that went into it, barring the vocals, obviously. So what we'll do is jump into the project file now. So this is the final project file. You can see I've got everything in folders, and I'll colour code stuff. That's something that I do quite a lot now. Really, I find it really helps just to organise stuff and see what's going on. And it's something that I've got quite a lot better at, because I used to just drop stuff in and it'd be all over the place, and then when you're trying to figure out what you're doing, it's not great. So I'm much better at that. I tend to put them in folders and colour code them up, just so really quick reference I can see what's going on. So in terms of the structure of the track, it's fairly straightforward. I decided that in the end, like I'd use various different bits of the vocals and stuff, and in the end I ended up just using mainly vocals in the second half from Inja, and the first half is fairly just like musical, sort of instrumental in the main, apart from like these backing vocals that come in, which we'll have a look at in a bit. And then I tried to sort of build throughout, so add in sort of different bits that were kind of building up to a crescendo really in the second drop. In terms of the drums, which we'll have a look at first, all of these drums were built using drums that I'd already got, really. So I didn't do any, there was not a lot of processing going on at all. Because of the time constraint that I had, I didn't have time to be sort of building drums from scratch, processing stuff. It just takes too long, and I needed to sort of get into an idea really quick. So the first thing I did, once I'd picked out a couple of the stems that I wanted to focus on, was I needed some drums in there. So started dropping in some breaks. And like I say, I didn't want to be doing too much processing and editing and stuff. So what I did was, or what I've been doing is I've been gradually sort of building up a bit of a library of breaks from tracks that I've made. So when they're finished, or if they're old projects that maybe haven't gone anywhere, but I like the drums, then I'll start to export those. And then I've got a folder of all of those here. These are the ones I've done so far. And so I just sort of went digging through there, trying to find what would work. Came across a couple. One of them was this. Which was from a tune that I never actually finished, but that ended up being pretty much the backbone of the drums. I've just listened to the drums. That is the main break which I built around. There's also this samba layer, and then I think some of the other bits, because it was one of the most recent tunes, was Journey Through, which had not long come out on Gold Fat, and I think I used the snare and the kick from that. I can find it. So they made up the track really, so I just started dropping them in. So we've got the kick, so they're both from the Journey Through track. I've then got the snare clap, which was from that first break that I played, and then the samba layer that I played, and the rest again were all coming from just other breaks that I'd already chopped and processed. So just have a quick dig through and see what we've got. There's an Amen in there, which if I have a look, that's also coming from Journey Through. Scorpio, funky drummer. Some shaky hats. They're from an old tune that I put out a couple of years ago, self-release, called Memories. And some shakers. Or a couple lots of shakers, oh, tambourine. And then lastly, triangle, which again I think was from Journey Through. So I reused quite a lot of bits, and like I say, if I hadn't done that, it would have just taken too long. And if I look at the processing that's going on there, if I just look at the inserts for that, if I just flick through, very minimal processing, because it's already been processed already. A lot of this stuff has just got hardly anything on it, but clip in on that, probably just to cut off the peaks. Bit of reverb on that. I'll come to that in a sec, that clap verb. Just generally just rolling off the low end, really. Not a lot of processing. That one's probably got a little bit more. So I'll listen to that. What have I done there? Just rolling off some of the top, probably because it was clashing with some of the hats and stuff. A couple of nasty resonant frequencies, bit of shaping just to probably tighten it up a little bit, boosting the transient in the low mids, and just a bit of saturation. And again, not a lot going on. I'm using this plugin. I use this quite a lot now. Some stuff it can absolutely destroy it, which can be good, but sometimes it just doesn't sound particularly nice. Other times it can give that nice, anything from subtle saturation to real sort of like smashing things to bits. So I tend to use that a lot on drums. But yeah, minimal processing on that. Not a lot going on at all. So we listen to all the drums in full. Yeah, they sound pretty good, and like I say, not a lot of processing gone on there just to get to that, and which is what I needed. One of the things was this verb clap. Sorry, this clap here, which is actually a little snip of the Inja vocal. So on one part of the track, he's just got little breaths and little ad-libs and stuff. And I just thought it sounded cool. So I thought I layered that up with the clap. And it just gives a bit of extra interest. I also used it into the break as well, into the breakdown, just to give a little bit of a tail off. And I was kind of thinking of like a bit of an exhale, so like breathing out as things come to a sort of a halt for a minute. And that was the drums, really. In terms of any bus processing, just have a quick look at that. I don't think there's a lot going on there. Always send my drums into a group, normally a kick and a snare group and a tops group. This one didn't have a kick group because there was only one layer for the kick. It had already been taken from somewhere else where it already got layers. It didn't need anything else. So the tops group, bit of clipping, and then probably just a bit of side chain. Just side chaining against the snare and the kick probably. Snare group, just a bit of compression just to glue it together, a little bit of clipping just to take off the peaks, and a little bit of EQ. And the drum group, hardly anything going on there at all, because all the processing had pretty much been done beforehand. Not doing any compression, just a little bit of saturation, driving it into this MAC-T plugin, and a bit of EQ, just boosting around about 100 and about 10k. So pretty subtle, not doing too much. And that's something that I've been much better at. That's something that I've been improving really, is processing less. And obviously when you're reusing stuff, you don't need to process as much because you've already done it, but just generally processing less. I also usually have a drum parallel channel and obviously drum reverb channel. So that's just adding in like a layer of the drums, which is, if I just find that, FX channels. Yeah, just smashing the drums into a compressor. And then just blending that signal back in. So rather than compressing the main drum group and losing the transients from that, just blend this back in. It just gives it a bit more, it just gives it a lot more power, and it increases the sort of stereo width a little bit as well, and just sort of brings everything up. And then a drum reverb. which I normally do on a send, just because it means I can roll off the bottom, roll off a little bit of the tops, and you've just got a little bit more control over it, and then I just use the slider just to sort of set the level for that. And that's it. That's the drums. So fairly simple, built from repurposed brakes basically. So I'd recommend doing that. Go through your old projects, rip out any of the drums, make yourself a little folder of all the different layers and brakes. How I tend to do it is I'll normally do like a full brake and then probably a kick or kick and snare, and then the tops, which is coming from the groups that I've got set up. If there are other layers specifically that I want, then I'll send them out as well. So if I know it's got specific bits in it, rides, shakers and stuff like that, because you spend that long processing and editing stuff that you might as well reuse it and just save yourself that time getting to the idea quicker. So next up, the musical parts. So like I say, I built this mainly around this Rhodes from the stems. So I just took a little chop out of that. Not really any processing. There was a little dip I took out of it and a bit of a roll off in the low end. That was probably just clashing with something else. So, but other than that, I mean, the stems were just sounded brilliant anyway. There wasn't a lot needed to be done. A little bit of filtering, which automates throughout. Not too much, just a bit of a roll down there. So I used that a couple of times. Use it in the intro, and I just chopped that up. And I think I've reversed it as well, just to give it a little bit of a different sound. And I also took a little snip out of it and reversed it, and then added various effects on it. You can just see, have a look on the effects. Bit of delay, bit of EQ, just to put some emphasis onto the 16s. Just there. And then just use that as a bit of a motif really throughout, just as a sort of recognisable little sample. One of the bits I used was this synth, which was a massive solo. But I only wanted that bit really. So I just chopped that a little bit out, added a load of delay sort of reverb on it, because I needed it to sort of blend off into the background. I didn't want it to stop abruptly because I was chopping a little bit right out the middle. So it was just to help it tail off really. And I also use these strings. No processing at all going on that. So this is kind of the theme really, is minimal processing throughout. And I think that was pretty much for the stems that I used. That's pretty much it, I think. Apart from, no, there's guitar. So I did use the guitar a little bit in the musical elements. So just, you can see it's called reverse guitar mangled. I chopped a little bit out of the guitar sample or stem that was in there, reversed it, and then just sort of chopped it up to create a rhythmic element. I think I've added some other effects to that as well, which I've then sort of bounced into it. Just adds to the build really. And it gradually just fades up. What else? Second half, like I see I've also chopped up some of the roads here as well. And just reversed them, added some delay. It's kind of in a bit of a bridge section leading into the drop. Just wanted to add something. I wanted to keep it familiar, but sort of keep it interesting as well at the same time. And then after that, once I'd got those main elements in that I wanted, which really was the sort of the synth and the roads. Again, what I started to look at was other projects that I had, other things that I could rip off from somewhere else. So there was another project I'd worked on, fairly old one, and I knew that these bits would work, or they sounded in my mind like they would work. So one feature that you've got in Cubase is that you can go into, if you haven't got, because I know I didn't have the presets saved for the synths or anything like that, but what I can do is you can go to import tracks from project, and then you can select a project that you want to go. So I'll just take this one, even though this is the project that I've got open. And what it'll do is it'll load up all of the information about all the tracks that are in there, and you can just go through and then load them up, and it will load up all the audio files, or if it's a synth, then it will load up the MIDI track and the instruments, all the MIDI information, everything that's attached to that basically. If you've got drum, if you've got a group set up with sends and all that kind of stuff, you can select those as well on top of the other bits, and it will set up all the routing and set it all up exactly as it was in the previous project. So I know I've got a few bits in another project that were going to work, so I just loaded that up and imported them in, and then just rewrote the parts in terms of what would fit here. So there's a string pad, which is coming from Massive. And we've got this little pluck, which is coming from Prism. And the pad, which is coming off FM8. I can see I've just opened that up on the pad. There's a tremolator on that, which I do automate the depth on that. So there's a fair bit of automation on a couple of things, just to kind of keep it interesting. If I look on that one in particular, doesn't do so much here. But later on in the track, if we just fast forward a little bit, you can see there's a little bit of automation going on in the second half, really around about the builds to things. So using it to kind of build up, instead of putting in risers and stuff, just automating some of the stuff that I've already got. And then I've resampled that as well myself, and then just emphasised that, bringing a lot more top end, just to sort of increase the energy, really, which I resampled here. That's something I do quite a bit, is just resample my own parts and sort of add effects to them and do stuff to it. There's also an organ in there. Again, I think that's another one that I pulled from another project that I hadn't finished. Bit of EQ. I think the final main part is a bit of an arpeggiator that I wrote around the key or in the chords of the track, which sort of morphs and evolves quite a bit throughout the track. Just shows some of the automation on there. It's kind of building throughout the first half of the track. And then pulls back away again when it There's a little break of the drums. And then it comes back in again. And what I did with this is I was driving it into a clipper. So it meant that I could really force it, really pump the volume up, but it wasn't really increasing the volume. And it sort of added to, sort of brought a bit more grit and distortion into it the louder it got. And then I used that again in the second half, which is kind of the climax, the second drop. It drops back in with that. Kind of building towards part of the vocal, which I'll come into in a minute. What else we got? So we've got this little string pad, which is in the intro and towards the beginning. And then about halfway through, it comes back in and it kind of climbs and just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. I just wanted to sort of build the energy, build the sort of, just build the intensity really, very subtly using this in the background. As you can see, there's quite a lot of automation in the musical bits. And I think that's something that's quite important, just to kind of keep adding that interest, even if it's subtle. Some things are doing a lot, some things are not doing much. Sometimes it's just kind of volume. In this particular instance, I'm even like automating the softness of the clipper that's working on that particular track. Just anything to add a little bit more movement or intensity, or make some space, whether it's EQ, volume, whatever it is, just to sort of keep things changing, even when they're not really changing all that much. So that's the musical bits. So next up, I guess, is we'll have a look at the bass, because that's nice and quick. So the bass, here's the bass stem, and this is bounced to audio. And I did that for a reason, which I'll explain in a sec. We'll just have a listen to that. So I'd bounced that from an original VST track, and it's got a bit of like max bass on it, which is just bringing out some harmonics and a bit of side chaining from, a bit of compression there, and some side chaining off the kick, and then just rolling off the top. But that originally came from a synth, so it's an 808 style bass, but I actually created it myself in Retrolog, which is Cubase stock synthesizer. This was another thing I got from a different track as well, again, that I reused, but this is a patch that I'd made before. It's just a sine wave patch really, which has got some automation, an envelope on the pitch. So because it's set up on here, we've got the pitch, the filter envelope is actually modifying the pitch. So it just gives it a bit of an impact on the beginning, gives that 808 style bass. And then you can control how much pitch it's got on the start of it, and it just gives a little bit more impact on it. So I did that, but then one of the things that Tony mentioned as well when we were sort of getting like feedback to and fro was with 808s, because you've got that pitch bend in them, that gave it its sort of character. But what it also does is it means that sometimes it might sort of affect the tuning and how it fits with other instruments. So I did tweak the patch a little bit, but one of the things he suggested was that you could load it into Melodyne and sort of straighten the pitch to make it more consistent. Well, I don't have Melodyne, but Cubase does have something called Vari Audio, which is essentially the same thing or very similar, in that you can select any parts that you want within your audio file, and you can sort of move them up and down. You can quantize the pitch, so it straightens the pitch. Obviously, because this was written in MIDI, it was already straight anyway, but you can also straighten the curve. If I just zoom in a little bit, you can straighten the curve of the pitch of it. Change the formant as well. So I went in and sort of edited that a little bit and just straightened it out, and that sounded much better. But back to the bass, if you have a listen. Fairly straightforward. Does that pretty much throughout. It changes a little bit in the second half of the first drop, just when it goes into the kind of bridge section. And that was mainly to do with the vocal parts that I'd used. There was a couple of vocal stems. They change a little bit what they're doing, so I had to change the bass line around that, really. And then I sort of edited and changed all the other musical bits around that just to get it to fit. If you remember, I did the different edits on the reverse rows just to get them to fit with that particular section. So next up, I suppose, is the vocals. So there's loads of vocals that I could have used. You can see these bits that are in white are muted. So originally I'd got quite a bit more of the vocal in there. Because the vocal's so good, I just wanted to use loads of it, really.
I see souls light on earth gems. Half the time they don't even realise that they are them.
So originally I was gonna put that in there, and then sort of conversations that we had along the way sort of lean towards using a bit less of the vocal, so I was a bit more selective about it. So that's where the first half really became a little bit more instrumental, and I focused more on the harmony, backing vocal parts, and made them a little bit more prominent part than they maybe were in the original. So lots of different harmony parts. So I just picked out some bits to use in the intro. When we get to the second half, I start to tease in some of the Inja vocals. So
Anything's possible.
Just dropping in little bits there. I've just chopped out a little bit of the Inja there, run it through isotope just to affect the sound a bit.
Anything's possible.
So it sounds a bit kind of
Anything's possible.
almost telephony. And just layered those up just so it sounds a little bit different.
Sometimes the things you want ain't what you need in life.
And then you've got the Inja vocal coming in there, which sort of backs up what the female vocal's doing.
Sometimes the things you want ain't what you need in life.
And that's it really in terms of the vocals first half. They're all going to a group, but I don't think there's any processing done on it. Just sent them to if I can open that up. Sent them to a group, nothing going on there at all. In terms of processing, the only real processing that I did on the vocals was for the kind of little snips that I used and little snippets that I cut out. Then in the second half, from the drop, it changes a bit. So we use these long sustain parts in the drop, and then that's when I bring in the main Inja vocal.
Cause I believe in fate, I believe in us. I believe if you believe we can make it up. We are on the path where journeys are tough. When the mist rolls and diversions.
And again, not really any processing on there.
Conflicted, but then
What I did into the drop is just cut out a couple of bits just to emphasise a couple of words. Or a word, so I think it was then. So if I listen there, just a couple of different ways of emphasising that.
Leave it twisted, conflicted, but then.
So they ring off into the drop a little bit. And then
If our worlds collide, anything's possible.
There's a little bit more comes in.
And open up your opticals and watch it all.
Again, just got that delay ringing off. And then and you've got the anything's possible snips towards the end as well. And the only thing left really is the effects. So the effects were all made in this track using elements from the track. I didn't use any stock effects that from any packs or anything. They're all created from stuff that was in the track. And the way that I did it for a lot of them was I made this FX record track and then routed stuff into it. So what that meant is that I could fiddle around with the effects on there and then just record a file into here so you can tweak it live. And that means that you can just play around and just get some really weird sounds. So let's have a listen. So those are the Rhodes samples which have been affected. That's the guitar sample. Again, the Rhodes up here, and down here we've got, it's called Alien Effects, but this is basically something that I've done with the vocal. That whoosh there, I think that is made by twiddling, I think it was frequency echo. I was playing around with the settings on there that made that little whoosh sound. And that's pretty much all of the effects really. So they're not doing anything massive, but without them, they kind of just fill a space. So just finding snips of different elements in the track, and just sort of resampling them, bouncing them. So I'll either use render in place, so bang a load of effects on it and then go to render in place and drop them in and then repeat. I'll use time stretch a lot. So time stretch things, add effects to them, resample them, and just keep repeating that process until you get something that sounds interesting. Or like I say, feed it into another track where you can record the output of a track and then you can actually do automation or move things on the fly, and just do that for a couple of minutes and then go through and chop bits out that sound cool and reuse those. So that's pretty much it. I don't think there's anything else to say. So that's how I went about tackling this remix. I think it's ended up working pretty well. Hopefully you found some of them insights useful in terms of how to tackle a remix or how to sort of speed up a couple of things that you're doing in your process if you're limited on time, or you're doing something like I was where I didn't have a lot of time to be creating things from scratch, and a couple of tips that you can use for yourself. If you want to hit like, hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I'll have some new content up soon. If you want to go and listen to the full track, I'll put a link in the description below for the London Electricity Rebuilding Better Worlds album. Absolutely brilliant album, loads of really, really good tracks on there, including mine, luckily. So yeah, thanks for listening.